Hi everyone, and thanks again for joining today's webinar, where we will talk about the common attacker entry points that are likely to cause high impact breaches and simple steps to close those gaps. I'm Tomer Curran, the Product Marketing Manager at CYREBRO, and I'll be your moderator for this webinar. A bit about CYREBRO. We created the world's first security operations platform, or SOC platform, providing state-level cybersecurity to businesses of all sizes. The SOC platform combines the critical capabilities of a SOC, such as 24/7 monitoring and detection, incident response, threat intelligence, and more, all with an interactive online platform. Now let's jump into discussing a few beginning things before we introduce our speaker. Like I said, we will go over how to install captions. Here we go. All right, so for those of you who would like live captions, they are available through Zoom to translate our speech into text. So you can enable this by clicking on More at the bottom, or might be at the top of your screen, then Captions, and then select the language that you want. If that wasn't clear, hopefully these images will help you out as well. Now, this webinar is interactive, so you will have two polls to answer and engage with, one at the start and another one towards the end. You can also submit any questions you have in the questions window, and we'll do our best, of course, to answer all of them. If you have any technical difficulties, you can message us in the question window as well, and we'll do our best to help you out there also. Following the webinar, there will be a short survey to get your feedback about the session. Because of course, we're always looking to improve, provide you the best content, and of course, the most relevant topics. So I'll start with some introductions and structure. Again, my name is Tomer Curran. I'm the Product Marketing Manager at CYREBRO, and I'll be leading you through the discussion today. Our guest speaker today is Naggel, CYREBRO's DFIR team leader. And he will discuss some common attacker entry points that came from real incident response cases that he has personally dealt with at CYREBRO. So thanks for joining us, Evan.
Thank you for having me.
Evan, can you tell us a bit about your background experience at CYREBRO as well?
Of course. So hi, everyone. My name is Eden. I am CYREBRO Digital Forensics and Incident Response team leader. I've been with the company for almost 5 years. 4 out of the 5 I've been a DFIR team analyst. And then in the past year, I've become the team leader of that same year, team, sorry. I've been in the field for almost 10 years, and my road in this field began as a DFIR analyst in the intelligence corps in the Israel Defense Forces.
Mm-hmm. All right, thanks, Evan. Awesome. Now let's jump into what we'll be discussing today. We're going to go over a few topics, such as the likelihood and impacts of common entry points for most businesses. We'll discuss what we'll be discussing will focus on top of the 3 common entry points that we'll analyze and you'll learn about as we progress. We also will be talking about what can happen when common entry points are overlooked. We'll do this by diving into real CYREBRO incident response cases, those that Eden has experienced himself. Then for each common entry point, we'll provide you with best practices that can help you close these gaps and demotivate attackers from selecting you as a target, as well as succeeding in their actions. And finally, we'll wrap up with a live Q&A, so really feel free to submit your questions at any point throughout the discussion, and we'll reach them towards the end. So starting off, we'll open up a poll for you. As you can see the question on the screen, and now it's popped up as well. What do you think is the success rate of a 0-day exploit? Give you a moment to answer this. Jumping around between 97, the highest, 45%, the lowest. Giving you a sneak peek, no one has selected 45%. Few more seconds. All right. And I'll share the results with you guys. I can see that 97% has taken first place and 66% has taken second. The answer is 80%. So in this case, Evan, can you tell us why we should care about common entry points when zero-day attacks are so devastating and clearly have an almost perfect success rate being carried out?
So when we talk about 0 days, they are a new vulnerability that has not been yet identified by a vendor. It is a sophisticated way to infiltrate in using some sort of vulnerability into usually state-level organizations, and there's no defending from it unless anything is very enclosed, and it's usually for high priority targets.
Could you give us an example of a situation of some exploit, who developed it, for example?
Yeah, an example for a 0-day would be Eternal Blue, which was released in 2017 following the leak of the different attack tools by the NSA. So yeah, Eternal Blue was an excellent example for that.
It really sounds like this is an attack made for the big boys if you're a government or something really big. So in that case, let's dive into our next slide and look a little bit about the common entry points. What do we mean when we say common attacker entry points?
So a common attacker entry point is usually a very simple way to infiltrate an organization's network. Can be done from home without the need of a very large team, and usually it uses an easily breachable weak link in the network. And almost any network can be broken into by utilizing a common entry point.
Mm-hmm. You can really tell from the name, it really gives it away. It's a common entry point. Right. Let's compare the two, actually. So could you explain to us a little bit about the difference in terms of execution and what each would demand?
Yeah, so when we talk about 0 days, it would require a very large team of researchers going through thousands of lines of code, trying to find a security hole inside an application's code, a service code, any type of code-based application. And it requires a high expertise from the researchers, so they have to have a lot of knowledge of how to find these types of security issues in the code. And usually 0-day attacks are used on state-level targets, such as banks, offices, and all of the sort.
Mm-hmm. Right, and to compare that with common entry points.
In comparison, common entry points, as I said before, are very easy to execute, and they don't require such high expertise, and therefore they don't cost as much money to go ahead and perform them.
Mm-hmm. And both of which, right, and both of which cause downtime, legal obligations, and financial losses, of course, proportionately, but still relative to the target.
Absolutely.
Right, so let's introduce our first common entry point, the VPN. Now, almost anyone who uses a computer at work or streams shows at home has taken advantage of the VPN, whether for security purposes or simply to bypass geographical restrictions so you can watch Netflix shows available in other countries. Now, a VPN is used to secure and encrypt your connection over the internet by creating a private network connection. So Evan, can you tell us why VPN is a common entry point? How can it be taken advantage of by attackers?
Yeah, so when we take a look at past networks, you would be able to work only at the organization, be connected physically to the network and continue working. When the need arose, I don't know, 20 years ago, I guess, there was a need to work from home, to work remotely. And so the VPN solution was created, in which we can encrypt data transfer from your home network into the organization. Basically, what it is a gateway that once you are connected, it is obviously, as I said, the connection is encrypted, and you can access your network. You get an IP address of the internal network. If an attacker gains access to that VPN, either by stealing credentials or maybe even executing some sort of exploit, or that it has been released previously for that specific VPN service, an attacker can eventually gain full access to that network and perform any actions that would lead them to gaining full control over that network.
Mhm. It's funny because I feel like maybe 10, maybe 20 years ago, naturally before I was familiar with cybersecurity, or maybe that term wasn't even invented yet, the VPN seemed like a very secure way to access another network. So let's take a look at the consequences for VPN security in one of our cases. Go ahead, Eden.
All right. So a few years ago, we've investigated a case in which an attacker managed to gain credentials of a specific user inside one of our clients' organizations. And what they did is that they gained access, then they connected to the VPN. Even though the user had multi-factor authentication enabled, the user had some sort of MFA fatigue, and when they saw they were prompted with the prompt, they just clicked yes without even trying to interact with a VPN. They could have been wherever, whenever. That allowed immediately access for the attacker to the network. From there, they began scanning the network for active assets, eventually reaching some more unsecure assets, then gained high credentials and took over the domain.
Mm-hmm. All right, wonderful. Now let's take a look at some best practices so this does not happen to any one of you. Eden?
So I spoke a lot about MFA. MFA is the most important part of a VPN. You have to have MFA. So that means that no attacker, even if they get credentials, they cannot log in. Make sure that unlike our client from my story before, you have MFA that is interactive and not just a yes or no prompt. And also the second most important part for these best practices is geolocation restrictions or conditional access, meaning that if I work from Israel, normally, if we see somebody using my user and trying to connect from an American IP address, they would be immediately denied, and an alert would be obviously triggered, and we can begin investigating.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's funny, every time I see a series of best practices, MFA always pops up as the first or the second best practice. And like we actually discussed the other day when reviewing this content, I was asking you about this little dongle that my grandmother 20 years ago had, and I could not understand the concept of what this was. And what she would do, I'm not sure, maybe she worked at a bank or something 20 years ago. And the dongle had a series of 6 digits on it. It was not connected to anything. You didn't need to connect it to anything. It was not a USB. And it would run through these 6 digits every minute. And she explained to me that at the time, she would enter her credentials into her system. And then using this, now I kind of see that it's a 2-factor authentication method to enter into her system. So that concept really went and progressed and developed. And every now and then you can hear of a new kind of multi-factor authentication method that topples the last one, which had an issue with. So yeah, I find that to be very cool. There we go. All right, on to our next common entry point, the unpatched and obsolete operating systems. Now, similarly to VPNs, this entry point also reaches all of us, both in our homes and in the office. For example, the ever so familiar Chrome update button that many of us neglect until it starts to change colors from green to yellow to red, if anyone's ever noticed that. Now, if the update Chrome is offering includes a security patch, until you have patched that entry point, you are open to vulnerabilities, at least to some degree. On the other hand, some offices and sometimes more conservative organizations, if I'm not mistaken, hospitals, universities tend to do this. They use obsolete operating systems, such as Windows XP, Windows 7 sometimes. The issue here lies in the lack of service and support that these products receive, since they're too old and the vendor simply does not support them. So, Evan, can you give us some more background as to why this common entry point is an attacker favorite?
Let me plug into your example for Google Chrome. So let's say there's a vulnerability for Google Chrome that allows when going into a website, surfing into a website, allows code execution through the browser on our system. Let's say there's a vulnerability like that. As long as we keep that Chrome, that update button going from green to red and staying on the red, we are vulnerable. And as long as we don't patch it, we don't update it, any type of code can be executed on our system, eventually resulting in data leakage, info stealer installation, malware installation, and even ransomware. On the other hand, when we talk about obsolete or operating systems, it's a bit of the same. Operating systems run specific services and applications, and these, as long as they are obsolete, end of life, they don't get any new security updates. So these will never be secure enough as long as you have them.
Okay, now let's hear our CYREBRO case for this common entry point, the consequences of neglecting, update, and patch security.
Yeah, so in 2020, again, COVID, work from home, all that stuff, there were many attacks going on at the same time. We dealt with a huge influx in attacks during that time. And one of our clients that was a casino client, they had these old, those old devices like cash registers and stuff like that. They all had Windows 7 installed on them. And these were never updated. So this is like a combination of an obsolete operating system, Windows 7, that was 2020, Windows 7, I think stopped being supported at around the same time. And they were also not updated and not patched. Eventually, what happened is that an instance of WannaCry managed to infect one of these computers, and using the Eternal Blue vulnerability, they managed to exploit all that network of these cash registers who had Windows 7 that has not been updated since that Eternal Blue update of 2017. So that was a crazy case. We went in and we scoped the entire thing. We found out how this happened, what was the root cause, and exactly which devices were infected. Luckily, none of them were encrypted, and we managed to block this in a timely manner. And the client was obviously extremely happy that nothing was lost.
Yeah, that was a crazy story. Thanks for sharing that one, Evan. Now, could you offer us some best practices for these unpatched and obsolete operating systems?
Of course. The most obvious one is don't use Windows 7, don't use Windows XP, and keep your software updated as a policy. Make sure that your IT has a policy for updating and deploying operating system updates and also application updates. So if you have Office, make sure that Office is being updated. If you have web browsers, they should also be normally updated in all types of services, MS SQL, websites, sorry. Website services should be updated as well, PHP, all that kind of stuff. Now, when we talk about obsolete systems, sometimes it is impossible to replace them. Sometimes there's just this old software from 1999 that is still running on that same computer, same mainframe. From that time, there's no new programmer that can take over that and upgrade it to a new operating system. So what you have to do is you have to harden these systems and place a lot of monitoring and make sure that no attackers can get in. And if they manage to get in, at least make sure that they can't get out.
Well said. Now let's move over to our last common entry point, the RDS, or Remote Desktop Services. Now, for those who are familiar with RDS, this entry point may feel even a little bit obvious because it is the definition of taking control over your machine. RDS was created by Microsoft to enable exactly that, to grant users remote access and to control interactive sessions on machines and virtual machines. A common example of RDS is its use for remote work, enabling individuals to access their office computers uninterruptedly. This was probably amazing during COVID times. Naturally, these systems and applications have security precautions in place. So Evan, can you tell us why it's still a common entry point?
Of course. So there are different ways to work with RDS. One of them is that you have some sort of application running on your laptop or your work computer at home. And what you do is you connect to that server using that application. And from that server, you can either work on it itself, do all your work, you have access to your files and everything from a share, or you use that server to jump into another computer, maybe even your own computer at the office. Now, this server, very similar to VPN, is an entry point to the network. It sits in between the internet and the internal network. So this server is a key point of entrance. It's a common entry point because it leads anyone from outside to inside the network.
All right, then let's dive into our case and see how that was taken advantage of with consequences of loose RDS restrictions.
So if we take one of the key points from before, hardening your servers, your devices, in this case, one of our clients had an RDS server that was used for work from home. It was around May of 2020. It was, it was a bootleg application. They just installed it and forgot about it. What happened is they did not put any security for that specific server. So it was connected to the internet, but all its ports, all its services were actively visible from the internet. What happened was an attacker gained a username from somewhere of this specific client, and they began brute forcing that user on that server. Now, this server wasn't specifically monitored. As I said, it was just they just set it up and forgot about it. After the brute force was successful, the attacker gained access. It was a low privileged access, but they managed to dive into the memory of that specific server, which had credentials of a previously logged administrator lingering there. Once they managed to gain these credentials, they took over the entire domain. They stole all the client's data. Luckily, they didn't ransom them or anything. They just leaked the data. Once we were alerted of this incident, we immediately deployed our forensics team and made sure that we can contain the incident and eventually mitigate and remove all malware and attacker backdoors and remnants.
Thanks, Evan. Let's take a look at how we can prevent such a situation with some best practices for RDS.
So the two top ones are basically this say the same. So what we have to do is to have a proper policy that protects this specific server from firstly admin users accessing it, because there's no need for these users to use it, or if they use it, they have to set a policy that doesn't save their credentials in memory. So once they log out, it is cleared. That's the first two things. And the other thing is you have to set up proper 24/7 safeguards and monitoring systems, exactly like we do in CYREBRO. So we monitor that server, and if we see a brute force case, if we see weird logins and weird hours, it will immediately trigger an alert, and we'll know that something weird is going on.
Mm-hmm. Similarly, actually, to the MFA reaching most best practices, EDR definitely in the top 5 as well. So
absolutely.
Thanks again, and for sharing these stories and giving us some best practices to deal with these common entry points. Let's jump into our last poll. You'll see the poll in a second on your screen. And this one asks once a CVE is published, how fast can an attacker select a target? For those who are unfamiliar, CVE is common vulnerabilities and exposures. Common misunderstanding with exploits. I Googled it. Another few more seconds. All right, so this time, most of you were right. 50% actually selected 15 to 20 minutes. I hope this came from you guys reading the blog that we have in CYREBRO, because we do discuss this exact issue there. 15 minutes from the moment a CVE is public until an attacker can select and identify a victim. That's how fast that process can happen. And I'll give you a little bit of background, and then you can take it away from there. Basically, security researchers or an organization identify a vulnerability in software, hardware, or a system, and then a proof of concept is presented. And once the vulnerability gets a CVE number, it is published for all, giving security professionals the ability to mitigate the identified vulnerability. That is the intent. What can actually obviously happen is that list is public to everybody, including attackers, who this is their main source of income. So you can be sure that they're going to be on top of that. They're going to be on time. They are not looking to lose. They're looking to jump on you the moment that they can. So it's best to be on top of these at any point. And then do you want to elaborate a little bit about the CVEs?
I can simply give an example. In CYREBRO, we are monitoring, I think we have many clients, and let's say there was the log4j vulnerability that allowed code execution. Immediately when it was released, our intelligence team releases what we call a CTI, Cyber Threat Intelligence Report, to our clients. We immediately saw alerts for that specific exploitation. And we had about 5, 6, 7 clients, I think, with active incidents, because what happened is that once the CVE was released, normal scanners that are scanning the web indefinitely just added this feature to try to test this log4j. They scan, they succeed in accessing those servers and deploy some sort of malware or backdoor, and then they continue on to the next steps.
Mm-hmm. So basically, close your gaps or they will be exploited is what we're getting from this at the bottom line. Now we'll dive into our Q&As, see what you guys have ready for us. Okay, Let me go over this first question for you, Eden. What
Yeah.
level of expertise is needed from an attacker to execute these common entry points?
So common entry points, they are common. They don't require too much of high expertise, unlike 0 days, which require very high expertise. These common entry points can be used by what we call script kiddies, or people who understand how networks work, how to use openly available scripts and attack frameworks, and nothing more than that. So that means that they use these openly accessible features, and they don't have to program their own attack tools.
It's pretty low level, it sounds like.
Exactly.
But the damage financially varies, but it could reach the hundreds of thousands, millions, depending, but the damage is equal. The next question we have here: how can I know when I start to become a relevant target of 0-day attacks?
Let's say, from my perspective, if you are a target for 0 days attack, you will be aware of it. It will either be because you're a multi-million-dollar entity that will be a target for state-level groups, or if you have information that is critical to be leaked by these infiltrators, by these attackers, such as state resources, for example.
Mm-hmm. Another one: if I have a SOC of Cerebro, do I have to worry about common entry points?
That's a great question. You always have to worry about common entry points, because some of these things are not only blocked by monitoring. So monitoring is a passive thing. We see an alert, we investigate, and we send the conclusions if it is necessary to go on and initiate what we call an incident response procedure, meaning that my team and I begin forensicating the incident and making sure that we contain it. That's one thing. But as long as you don't keep your software updated, as long as you don't have proper security fences guarding your assets and your network from external attackers, a SOC is not the entire solution.
Right. The way that I understand this as well is Cerebro can identify and find these problems when they occur, but it's a shared responsibility where the individual or the organization, whether you're updating your Chrome browser, if you are an individual or as an organization, you have some kind of a patching program as to when vendors give you the opportunity to patch, you have systems in place to immediately do that. Because if you don't, no one's going to pick it up until it becomes a little bit too late.
Exactly.
These are commonly known as CTIs. You can also find them on our website. You can find them in the platform, but you do have to have some kind of feed constantly coming in of threat intelligence as well as patches, which are fairly similar. Now our last question. The last two questions. Okay, so this one's a bit of a long one. So apart from the good service you guys give that each company should implement, how does this relate to the monitoring, threat intelligence, forensic, and incident response services you provide?
Let me think about it.
Question.
Yeah, it's a long one. Generally, this knowledge will allow any organization to be more secure. But being more secure does not mean that you can just sit with your hands like this and forget about it. Many organizations buy security features, but forget to implement them and forget to maintain them, meaning that they update new signatures for the EDR and creating new firewall rules. If I buy a firewall and I implement it, but I don't create any rules, then it is basically nothing. So once you do implement rules, once you do implement the firewall itself and forward logs to Cerebro, for example, even if you don't have any firewall rules, we will be able to detect suspicious activities using our SIM, using our specific rules, and basically, yeah, anything that has data, that has logs, that has alerts will be forwarded if one organization chooses, obviously, will be forwarded to Cerebro. Will go through our different analytics and different engines that will eventually result in an alert when an incident happens. And obviously, if I can take it to my side, once an alert is triggered and we realize that this is a true case, this is a true positive, this is a sign for an attack, my team goes in and we do everything necessary to defend our clients.
Well put, and then we're actually having a flood of a few questions coming in last second. So here's another one. Is it a good idea to force Windows update whenever the update is released, or is it better to wait a few days?
So I'm not an IT guy, but I will answer with what I know. Usually there is a staging process for updates, not only Windows updates or operating system updates. For any software, there should be a staging process, meaning that we install the update on a certain group of computers or servers. We make sure for a few days that they work normally, the services continue, there's no downtime, there's no CPU spikes or stuff like that, there's no issues. And if we see that that's okay, we can deploy them a few days later.
Mm-hmm. And another one. When I receive a CTI report, what do I need to do with this knowledge? Do I need to update my Cerebro policies every time a CTI report is released?
I don't know about the last one because the Cerebro updates their own policies once we see a new CDI. But I can tell you that all of our CTI alerts, you see at the subject of that email, it says the CTI alerts, name of that vulnerability, and then it says in all caps, says patch now. So once you see our CTI alerts, that means that you and it relates to you, that means that you have to respond accordingly. And Cerebro obviously creates new rules and new detections for that specific vulnerability.
I think a good example of this, an extreme one though, would be like you said, the log4j warning. Usually threat intelligence, they can pick up on these things often early before it starts to happen. But once it does, the feeds and the intelligence that they gather gives them the early heads up to inform anyone that they need to quickly enclose this gap before a huge amount of destruction comes upon their organization. So these kinds of feeds become very critical, specifically for the very, very big problems. Other than that, like I said earlier, patches really do need to be regularly put into a process and managed in a very specific kind of way, rather than doing it manually and hoping to find the right patch or to see an indication that the vendor may or may not provide.
I can actually give an example for that.
Please.
Just a short one. There was, I think, a managed engine vulnerability a few months ago. We've released a CDI alert, and most of our clients were not affected. But one of our clients was affected. I think that was a few hours immediately after we released that CDI. So that was this amount of time to respond, but there was still enough time.
Yeah, it's all about timing.
All about time.
All right, another one, a juicy one, a really
Oh.
juicy one. AI is always going to be juicy, especially today. Have you seen any evidence of recent advancements in AI changing the security landscape?
That's a difficult question to answer. I will say a few things. So since AI has so much information, anyone can use it to enhance their thinking process, and that would assist us as investigators and as analysts. We use AI to come up with new ideas or understand how specific things work. On the other hand, attackers also take advantage of AI for understanding how things work. However, when we talk about AIs performing attacks or AIs writing attack tools or AIs defending those, it is still unseen, and I'm highly curious about that, although it scares me very much because there's no there's no telling what will happen once we let AI run loose and perform these malicious acts. So we'll have to invent our own AIs for defense as well.
Definitely, that's a topic we could just talk about forever. What if and what will be?
Absolutely.
All right, so we have time for one more question. Pretty straightforward. Are there any other major common entry points to look out for?
Yeah, I think I spoke of it like briefly within one of the other entry points. My favorite one specifically would be that you have to harden your systems. So meaning that if a system is not hardened, if I have a server that is a web server, it has a simple website on it, and that server is obviously accessible from the internet. If I don't apply the proper policy for denying access to any ports other than that web server's port, then attackers can utilize the services that are opening these ports and access your organization. For example, we've just had a case recently where there was this SQL server. SQL servers are open. Specifically, that one was open in port 1433, but there was no firewall policy. So the RDP port 3389 was also open to the internet, and that gave attackers and scanners full access to try and brute force their way in. And eventually they did. They managed to get in. They got in through that SQL server and eventually infected the entire organization.
Yeah, these come. Oh, sorry, jumped out of everything. There we go. Hang on.
So switcher displays.
Yeah, it's just jumping all over the place. All right, we're back, and we're back. So honestly, the reason that we're doing this webinar today, the reason this whole concept started, is Eden and I were talking. And this was about a year ago, if I'm not mistaken. And I felt like I kept seeing the same issues and breaches and attacks on the news, yet everyone was hyper-focused on how sophisticated a recent zero-day was on $1 billion organization. Now, I understand it hits the news and it's like AI, it's very interesting to discuss, but it's likely not what is going to end up hitting you. And when we were talking, it didn't blow my mind, but I did not know any of this. So it was a burden on my mind. And from here, we ended up creating a blog series discussing exactly this matter, as well as putting together an ebook that goes over the 5 common entry points that you should actually see in the chat as a link. And we'll share it with you as well after the webinar in an email. And I believe we have one more question, even though I said that we are finished with them, to just keep popping in. So this one is, how long should I keep IOCs in CYREBRO from a previous ransomware attack? Forever?
Okay, so I can answer that by saying that it depends on the type of the IOC. A hash is a one-to-one value and will always be necessary for blocking. A domain usually also is a one-to-one and should be blocked. So if there was a domain that was used for attacking, and like a command and control center or whatever, yeah, it could be blocked indefinitely. An IP address, however, I think don't record me on that. I think that would be 90 days until, but I'm not sure. It depends on the IP address. It depends on the register of this IP address specifically. But yeah, if we see an IP address, we recommend to block it, and it will be alerted for a certain amount of days, weeks, months, but not indefinitely.
Right, and another one. What are, according to your experience, the best zero trust network access available out there that you could suggest as a better approach for replacing VPN connections?
I think that I don't have the answer for that right now, unfortunately.
The best answer.
What's that?
Sometimes the best answer. Well, you don't want to.
I don't want to give false information. I don't want to guess. I would have to research on that.
Yeah, definitely. That's a big question. We will try to get back to you on that one because we don't want to leave that question open-ended. But that's all the questions that we have for today. So thanks everybody for attending. We appreciate it. We hope you enjoyed this session. And we hope to see you in the next CYREBRO webinar. Thanks everyone for attending. Thank you, Ed.